Hello everyone, thank you so much for stopping by once more. I had been in a conversation that was pleasant with a viewer of mine in the discussion of what society would be like without money. The discussion came from a few forum posts that suggested that that the absence or abolishment of money would lead to a better, more egalitarian society. Possibly including better education, because education would be situated more upon the purposes of helping a person pursue their vocation, their own particular interest, that people would spend more time with their family because they would be no longer yoked away from their family by work, that people would have more free time to do whatever they so pleased with their life, that society would be more egalitarian and more equitable to individuals within that society, and that it would just be a general boon for society at large to abolish money entirely. And I very much enjoy thinking about these things, and I wish I were as optimistic to believe so. I'd like to share with you some of my opinions on this subject. Firstly, I think it's important to discuss what exactly money is. If I look at a dictionary definition, money is a standardized unit of recognizable value, or whatever definition you use, it will likely be something similar to that. So, in regards to that, what exactly is money? Well, it makes sense how money functions in society. I would suggest then that all human interaction is some form of money. All human interaction with one another, or even interaction with the self, is money. So to not so in in its broadest possible form, you could even say that consciousness is currency in of itself. And so in the broadest sense, if you were not conscious, you would have essentially abolished money, because you would have no unit of value towards in relationship to anything. You would be unable to discriminate whatsoever. So in that sense, you would abolish money. But of course, that's a nonsensical answer, I guess you could say. It doesn't satisfy the itch. It doesn't satisfy the question. So let's restrict it a little bit more. We could say that all human interaction is currency then. All interaction between people represents some kind of unit of exchange. All forms of interaction are some kind of unit of exchange. So let's abolish all human interaction. Even animals barking perhaps could be, but for the sake of this, let's just assume we abolish all human interaction. Well, you would have less free time. All of your free time would be spent dedicated to chasing food, to chasing water, to sleeping, to resting, to avoiding the harsh conditions of the environment. So I think it would be very difficult for a person to have a comfortable life, as discussed in this moneyless utopia, if we abolished all human interaction. But many of you will argue that human interaction in of itself is still too broad. So let's restrict it a little bit more. Let's say that money in this instance is anything. Let's say that money in this case is some kind of tradable good, right? It is some kind of not tradable in the bartering sense, but let's just accept the mainstream definition of money as some kind of currency or unit of value in the way we know it. So either some kind of gold standard or some kind of modern fiat. Following from this, we might be able to see that we might be able to find ourselves at the conclusion that we have two things left. We could argue bartering is still a viable form of economy, and we could argue that reciprocal mutual favors are also a viable economy. And oftentimes when we discuss about abolishing money or abolishing currency, there tends to be this general trend of glorifying or idealizing societies built off of a bartering model, or built off of a society that engages in mutual favorship, reciprocal favorship, non-legally binding mutual favorship. So if you do a favor for me, I owe you one, and if I do you a favor, you owe me one, right? Some kind of informal agreement. And these are almost always the tools by which such a society seeks to get rid of or do away or obsolete the need for fiat or gold standards or other such currencies. They often portray bartering and reciprocal favorship or mutual aid as being somehow a solution to the inequities and inequalities of our modern society. That's usually what the meat of the subject really boils down to. So this is where I think the discussion gets interesting. In my opinion, I think we should address bartering first, or let's go with reciprocal favorship or mutual aid. Some people make a distinction between mutual aid as being non-reciprocal or not necessarily reciprocal. Other people make a distinction and assume that mutual aid and reciprocal favorship are identical. For the sake of this discussion, I'm going to assume that they are both the same, because you essentially end up in the same place, in my opinion. Whether you have a society that just agrees upon mutual assistance, and I think you will essentially end up in the same predicament, and you'll see what I mean very soon. So, if we had a society that was based upon mutual favorship, the first thing I would like to point out is that I feel such a society would be rife with and ripe for all kinds of inequity, perhaps greater inequity than we have right now. I feel that oftentimes when we talk about progress or novel ideas, we think about the potential good and ignore the potential bad when we think about it favorably. And oftentimes this comes from a malcontent in our current position within the status quo, so we tend to think that any other paradigm would potentially be better than the one we are now. It's the classic is ought fallacy. So I would suggest that in a society that was based off of reciprocal favorship, inequity would probably be more rampant than it is in our current one. Consider that in our current society, the standardization of currency allows us to say that a coffee is $5, let's say. And whether you are an ugly or an attractive, and keep in mind here, I believe that all people are subjectively infinitely beautiful in the eyes of our Creator, but just for the sake of the argument, let's talk about the objective sense here, and in the sense that society deems it to be, rather. Whether you are ugly or whether you are attractive, or whether the bartender is ugly or attractive, the coffee still costs $5. No matter what, it costs $5. If we lived in a society that was based off of mutual favorship, I could see this as being very different. In a society of mutual favorship, the more attractive I am, the better able I am to acquire favors from others. And the more I will be able to satisfy the favors I owe others with less work. Consider, for example, that if the bartender is attractive, a person who is interacting with the bartender is likely to perceive the quality of the item they are receiving as greater than if the bartender is disheveled in appearance. Likewise, and therefore, an attractive person would be able to command more. An attractive person would be able to command more for the same cup of coffee than a person who is of less conventionally pleasing appearance. And you may say to yourself, oh, well,